Welcome to the deep dive, where we kind of like get into the nitty-gritty of a topic, explore it in depth. And today, it's all about something that might seem pretty straightforward at first, but it actually has some really interesting twists and turns once you dig a little deeper.
I love a good deep dive.
Me too. So the question we're tackling is, what happens to all the waste we create at home when we start working from home instead of going to the office? Like, does it change how much we throw away? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question, especially with so many people making that switch to remote work these days.
Right. And luckily, we've got some really cool research to help us unpack this. We're diving into a paper called The Effect of Remote Working on Regional Waste, Evidence from South Korea. And get this, they actually used the whole shift to work from home during the COVID-19 pandemic as a way to study the impact on household waste habits in South Korea.
Oh, wow, that's clever. Like using the pandemic as a sort of natural experiment.
Exactly. It's like this unique opportunity to look at what happens when a whole bunch of people suddenly start working from home. So, initially you might think, okay, more time at home probably means more waste, right?
Yeah.
Like more takeout containers, more online shopping boxes, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I would have guessed too.
But this research actually shows that it's way more complicated than that. Like there are some surprising shifts in the types of waste that people generate when they work from home. But before we get into all that juicy stuff, let's take a step back and think about the whole trend of remote work, even before the pandemic hit.
Right, because working from home wasn't just some sudden thing that popped up out of nowhere. It was already on the rise, gradually becoming more and more common.
Totally. So this research points out that in the U.S., way back in 1965, only a tiny fraction of people worked remotely, like something around 0.4%.
Wow, that's minuscule.
Yeah. But then fast forward to 2016, and that number had jumped up to 4%. Still not a huge number, but it shows that the groundwork for remote work was definitely being laid.
And then, bam, the pandemic hits and everything changes.
Right. Suddenly, it's like everyone's working from home if they can. In fact, the research mentions that globally, somewhere between 25% and 50% of workers were doing remote work during that time. It was a massive shift.
Huge. And of course, there was a lot of talk about how this would affect things like the job market, productivity, all the economic implications. So what did the research generally find about those aspects of remote work?
Well, it seems like the findings on the labor market and productivity were kind of mixed. Like some studies showed positive effects, some showed negative effects. There wasn't a clear consensus.
Interesting. So what were some of the positive things people were seeing?
Well, on the plus side, a lot of people talked about the benefits of not having to commute anymore. That's a huge one, right? Like saving time and money, less stress. And then there's the potential for a better work-life balance, at least for some people.
Yeah, that makes sense. More flexibility to manage your time, be there for your family, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And from the company's perspective, there's the potential to save money on office space and all those overhead costs. So there are definitely some appealing aspects to working from home.
For sure. But what about the downsides? What were some of the negative effects that researchers found?
Well, some studies suggested that there could be a dip in productivity for some people when they work remotely. Like maybe they get distracted more easily at home, or they miss the collaboration and social interaction of being in an office.
I can see how that could happen.
Yeah. And it probably depends a lot on the type of work you do, the industry, and just, individual personalities and work styles. So it's definitely a complex issue.
It sounds like it. So we've got this big shift to remote work, and we're trying to figure out all the ways it's impacting us, both economically and maybe even socially.
Right, and that's where the South Korean study comes in with a really unique perspective. They're not just looking at the economic consequences, they're also focusing on how remote work affects our overall well-being as a society, specifically when it comes to, you guessed it, waste.
Waste. Interesting.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Because what we throw away has a big impact on the environment, and it also has economic consequences.
Right.
Like, think about all the resources that go into managing waste, collecting it, processing it, disposing of it. It's a huge part of our economy.
It is, and governments are always trying to find ways to promote more sustainable waste management practices. Like they implement things like charging fees for waste collection, offering incentives for recycling, even putting environmental taxes on certain products.
Exactly. But to make those policies effective, They really need to understand what's driving our waste habits in the first place, like
Oh.
what factors influence how much we throw away and what types of waste we generate.
So are you saying that where and how we work might actually play a significant role in shaping those waste habits?
That's exactly what this research suggests. Like, think about it. Your daily work routine dictates so much about your consumption patterns, where you grab lunch, whether you cook at home or order takeout, all the packaging that comes with your food. Even the clothes you wear to work can influence what ends up in your closet and eventually, maybe, in the trash.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, if you're working from home, you might be more likely to order groceries online, which often comes with a lot of plastic packaging. Or maybe you're doing more home renovations or DIY projects, which could lead to more construction waste.
Exactly. And with so many people switching to remote work, it's like all those fundamental patterns of consumption are being disrupted. And that's bound to have an effect on the waste we generate.
It makes total sense. So, this South Korean study is basically trying to figure out how those changes in work arrangements are translating into changes in our trash cans.
That's it. And they had this incredible opportunity to do that because of the pandemic. It's like, suddenly millions of people started working from home. And that gave the researchers this unique chance to study the direct impact of remote work on regional waste patterns.
That's fascinating. So, how did they actually go about investigating this? Like, how did they measure the impact of remote work on waste?
Well, they used a pretty clever method. They looked at the pandemic as what they call an exogenous shock. It's like, this external event that dramatically changed how people worked. And their goal was to see how this sudden change impacted waste generation in different areas of South Korea. And to do that, they had to figure out how common remote work became in those different areas.
Oh, I see. Like, some areas might have had a higher proportion of jobs that could be done remotely, while others might have had mostly jobs that required people to be physically present.
Exactly. So to capture that variation, they developed what they call work from home WFH measures for different regions of South Korea.
Mm.
And these regions are, they call them Sigungu districts, but we can just think of them as like districts or counties.
Okay, districts. So, how did they create these WFH measures? Like, how did they determine which jobs could be done remotely and which ones couldn't?
Well, they actually borrowed a method that's been used in the U.S. to figure out the remote work eligibility of different occupations. And it's based on this idea that certain jobs are just inherently more difficult to do remotely because of their nature.
Right, like jobs that require specialized equipment or face-to-face interaction with customers or clients.
Exactly. So, for example, if you're a surgeon, you can't really operate on someone remotely. Or if you're a construction worker, you can't build a house from your living room. But if you're a writer or a software developer, you can pretty much work from anywhere with an internet connection.
That makes sense. So, did they just look at like broad job categories or did they get more specific than that?
They actually used a really detailed job classification system in South Korea called the KSEO, which stands for the Korean Standard Classification of Occupations. And they looked at these occupations at a very specific level of detail, like a two-digit level.
Wow, that's pretty granular.
Yeah, it is. And they combined this information on which jobs could be done remotely with data on the proportion of people in those specific types of jobs living in each of South Korea's 162 districts.
So they basically created a WFH measure for each district, right? Like a number that indicates how likely it is that people in that district could work from home based on their occupation.
You got it. And the measure ranges from 0 to 1, with a higher number meaning a greater share of the workforce in that district is in jobs that could potentially be done remotely. And here's the interesting part. They primarily used the WFH measure from 2019, before the pandemic, in their analysis.
Oh, I see. So they're looking at the potential for remote work in each district before the pandemic hit and then comparing that to the changes in waste generation after the pandemic when remote work became more widespread.
Exactly. It's like they're setting up a baseline to see if those districts with a higher potential for remote work experience different changes in waste patterns compared to those with a lower potential.
Clever. So they've got the remote work data sorted out. What about the waste data itself? Where did they get that from?
Well, they use data from a source called the National Waste Generation and Disposal Status, or NWGDS, which is compiled by the Ministry of Environment in South Korea.
Okay, the Ministry of Environment. So it's official government data then.
Yes, very reliable. And this data provides annual information on the different types of household waste generated in each district. So we're talking about things like general trash, food waste, plastic waste, textile waste, metal waste, even stuff like cans. They had this data for the years 2016 to 2021, which nicely covers the pre-pandemic period and the pandemic period.
Perfect. So they've got the remote work potential data for each district and the detailed waste data for those same districts over several years. How do they then connect these two sets of information to figure out the impact of remote work?
Well, their main analytical tool was a statistical method called difference in differences, or DID for short. It's a pretty common method used in research to study the effects of, like, policies or events, or, in this case, a massive shift in work arrangements.
So how does this DID method work?
Basically, it involves comparing changes over time between two groups. In this study, they compared changes in waste generation after the COVID-19 pandemic, when remote work became widespread, in districts with different levels of remote work potential before the pandemic.
Oh, I get it. So they're looking at how much waste generation changed in districts with a high potential for remote work compared to those with a low potential. And if they see a bigger change in the high potential districts, they can infer that remote work might be contributing to that difference.
Exactly. And to make sure they weren't picking up on other factors that might have been influencing waste generation during the pandemic, they also took into account a bunch of other variables. Like, they considered things like the initial population of each district, the average age of the residents, the types of industries present in the area, and even any pre-existing trends in waste patterns that might have been specific to those locations.
That's important. It helps to isolate the effect of remote work from all those other potential influences. So, after all that careful analysis, what did they find? Did working from home lead to a big increase in the overall amount of waste we produce?
Well, here's where it gets interesting. The main finding was that the total amount of household waste per household didn't actually change significantly based on how much potential there was for remote work in a district.
Really? So it wasn't like people were throwing away a lot more trash just because they were working from home?
No, not overall. But here's the twist. The types of waste being generated did change quite a bit.
Oh, that's intriguing. So it's not just about the quantity of waste, but the composition of that waste. What specific changes did they observe?
Okay, so get this. Districts that had a higher proportion of jobs that could be done remotely, they saw a significant increase in plastic waste.
Plastic waste. That makes sense.
Right, like maybe people were ordering more takeout or groceries online, which often comes with all that plastic packaging. And the study estimates that for every 1 unit increase in their WFH measure, plastic waste went up by about 0.031 tons per household.
That's a pretty substantial increase. And do they see changes in any other types of waste?
Yes. They also found a noticeable increase in textile waste in those same areas with higher remote work potential. So more clothes, linens, things like that ending up in the trash.
Interesting. Any ideas on why textile waste might have increased?
Well, they speculate that it could be related to, like, people having more time to declutter their closets while they're at home, or maybe they're doing more home improvement projects that involve fabrics, like, reupholstering furniture or making curtains.
Yeah, that makes sense. People are spending more time at home, so they're probably noticing things they want to get rid of or projects they want to tackle.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, they found that there was a significant decrease in food waste in those same districts with higher remote work potential.
Really? Less food waste. That's surprising. Why would working from home lead to less food waste?
Well, they propose a couple of possible explanations. One is that, with more flexibility to plan and prepare meals at home, people might be eating out less and therefore generating less food waste from restaurant leftovers or like expired takeout containers.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess if you're working from home, you're more likely to have leftovers from dinner readily available for lunch the next day.
Exactly. And then another possibility they mentioned, which is kind of interesting, is that remote workers might actually be experiencing heavier workloads or more disruptions to their regular lunch breaks.
Ah, the blurred lines between work and life when you're working from home.
Right. So maybe they're just not having as much time or energy to, like, cook elaborate meals or even eat as much as they normally would, which could lead to less food waste.
Interesting. It's like, those unintended consequences of a shift in work arrangements. So to kind of dig deeper into these potential behavioral changes, did the researchers look at anything beyond just the waste data itself?
They did. They actually conducted a survey in July 2022 called the Yanse-Yongwon Daily Time Use Survey. And this survey gave them insights into how people in South Korea allocate their time based on various factors, including whether or not they work remotely.
Oh, cool. So they can see how remote work might be changing people's daily routines and activities. And what did the survey reveal about remote workers?
Well, interestingly, it pretty much aligned with what other studies have found about remote workers. Like, they found that remote workers in South Korea generally spend more time on personal care activities, which makes sense since they're not commuting or getting ready for work in the same way.
Right. More time for like exercise, grooming, relaxation, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And of course, they found a significant decrease in the amount of time spent commuting, which was kind of a no-brainer. But what's interesting is that this increased time spent at home could potentially explain the rise in plastic waste they observed.
Yeah, I see the connection. More time at home probably means more opportunities to order things online, which often leads to more plastic packaging.
That's what they're thinking. And what about the potential link between remote work, heavier workloads, and reduced food waste? Did the time used survey shed any light on that? It did. They found that, on average, remote workers reported spending more time on what they called side work compared to those who didn't work remotely. So it's like they're not just doing their regular jobs from home, they're also taking on extra work or projects.
The hustle is real, even when you're working in your pajamas. But I guess that could support the idea that they're just busier overall and maybe don't have as much time to focus on meal prep or eating as much as they normally would.
Exactly. So it's like the time used data adds another layer of evidence to support the changes they observed in the waste patterns.
It's all starting to come together. But, whenever we're talking about research findings, it's always important to consider how reliable those findings are. Did the researchers do anything to make sure their results weren't just a fluke or due to some other factors they hadn't accounted for?
Oh, absolutely. They did a bunch of what they call robustness checks to make sure their findings were solid. Like, one thing they did was reanalyze their data after excluding regions that had experienced early and severe outbreaks of COVID-19.
Oh, that's smart, because those regions might have had unique waste patterns related to the pandemic itself, not necessarily to remote work.
Exactly. So they excluded those regions, and guess what? The core findings remain consistent.
Wow, so it really does seem like the changes in waste composition are tied to remote work, not just the pandemic in general.
Right. And they did a bunch of other checks too. Like, they controlled for the proportion of COVID-19 patients in each province. They used a broader measure of remote work eligibility. They considered potential spillovers between neighboring job markets. They even looked at the waste data in relation to the initial population instead of the number of households.
And did all those checks support their initial findings?
They did. Every time they tweaked their analysis, the core findings held up. So it really strengthens the case that the link they're seeing between remote work and these specific changes in waste types is a real one.
That's impressive. It sounds like they really did their due diligence to make sure their results were robust. So, after this deep dive into the research, what's the main takeaway? What should our listeners remember about the impact of remote work on waste?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that while working from home doesn't seem to drastically change the total amount of household waste we generate, it does significantly alter what we're throwing away. Like, those areas with more people working remotely saw a clear increase in plastic and textile waste, but a decrease in food waste.
So, it's like a shift in the composition of our waste, not necessarily a huge increase or decrease overall.
Exactly. And this has implications for how we manage waste, right?
Yeah?
Like, if we're seeing more plastic waste, we need to make sure our recycling systems can handle that influx. And if we're seeing less food waste, maybe that opens up opportunities for composting programs or other ways to divert food waste from landfills.
Absolutely. It's all about adapting our waste management strategies to match the changing patterns of waste generation.
Right. And for all of you listening out there, if you're working remotely or if you know a lot of people who are, take a moment to think about your own habits. Are you ordering more things online and accumulating more plastic packaging? Are you cooking less and maybe wasting less food?
It's really about being mindful of how our work arrangements might be influencing our consumption patterns and ultimately the waste we generate.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that brings us to our final thought-provoking question for today. Since remote work seems like it's here to stay, how do we ensure that we're managing waste sustainably in this new world of work? Like, what are the long-term implications for the environment, and what can we do as individuals and as a society to promote more sustainable practices?
That's a big question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But it's something we all need to be thinking about as we continue to adapt to this new way of working.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that's our deep dive for today. We hope you found it interesting and maybe even a little bit eye-opening. And next time you're taking out the trash or sorting your recycling, maybe you'll give a little thought to the fascinating connection between your work life and your waste habits. Until next time, happy diving.
Thanks for having me.
It's great having you.